I just saw a beautiful movie today called Atlas, and it's a movie where Jennifer Lopez is the protagonist of the movie, and I found it very interesting because it dwells with the concept of artificial intelligence, and it dwells with the idea that life is more than just organic. I mean, the traditional definition of what is life was something that is organic, something that struggles to survive, something that consumes resources. But now we have artificial intelligence and it is not organic, and it is so ubiquitous in our life these days that it really makes us think, is life just organic things, or is there more to life than just struggle for survival, and so on and so forth. There's a very interesting Star Trek episode as well, Star Trek The Next Generation, where Captain Picard faces the same conundrum about data, and whether data should be treated as a sentient life form or should it be treated like a mixie or a microwave oven. So very interesting movie. Spoilers, obviously, I will not talk about it, but primarily it deals with Jennifer Lopez, who's the protagonist, not trusting artificial intelligence and how she goes from that to trusting artificial intelligence and then finally becoming a friend with one. So it's a very, very interesting movie. Don't miss it. But today we are not talking about artificial intelligence and so on. We are today talking about enterprise architecture. So how do you do enterprise architecture, and how do you mature as an enterprise architecture capability within an organization? So when I say enterprise architecture capability, I mean an enterprise architecture team, enterprise architecture processes, enterprise architecture tools, enterprise architecture activities that we perform, enterprise architecture return of investment, and so on and so forth. So everything related to enterprise architecture, I basket it under the term enterprise architecture capability. So let's talk about it a little bit. Imagine an organization, and let's talk about the structure of the organization. So on the top, you have the CEO who's managing everything, and then within the CEO, you have different leaders within the organization, which are also called ECN or executive committee. And then let's assume it's a pharmaceutical organization. So you would have a business function called drug development, and then you would have a business function called manufacturing and distribution. You would have operational business functions such as HR and IT and so on. Now, enterprise architecture organization falls within IT. It should sit within IT. But the function of enterprise architecture should cut across all these different divisions. It should cut across all these business functions. So enterprise architecture, to start with, is less about IT and more about the architecture of the organization. And when I talk about organization, I don't mean the IT organization alone. I mean the entire organization overall. What are the different business functions, processes? What are the different activities that the business does, goals and objectives, and so on? And then how do we make it more efficient? How do we design it so that it is more efficient? Now, why does it fall within IT? It falls within IT because the activities that you need to perform to make the organization more effective require skills that are naturally within IT. Design skills, for example, or analysis skills, and so on and so forth. So then what does the enterprise architecture organization do? Right? Now, classically speaking, right, original definition of enterprise architecture said that it would sit on the top layer, cut across different organizations, and be watchful of all the activities that are being done within the organization. And this sounds a little bureaucratic, right? Anything that needs to be done has to go through the enterprise architecture organization. They will take a look at it. They will make sure that everything is, efficient, and then approve it so that it can be executed. It can be done. It's raining outside. So classical enterprise architecture is all about governance. It's about making sure that everything that is happening within the organization is happening according to the standards set by the enterprise architecture organization. But that sounds bureaucratic. And considering that the organizations are becoming more and more agile these days, and that change has become more and more all-pervasive throughout all organizations these days, and that organizations need to adapt and change quickly, it's very difficult to have a bureaucratic organization where everything is being inspected and governed, right? So what do we do about it? I sort of came up with the idea of modern enterprise architecture. This is not classical enterprise architecture, and it so happens that the TOGAF 10 also deals with the same concept. They don't call it modern enterprise architecture, but TOGAF 10 has been modified from 9.2 to make it more agile, to make it more flexible. How enterprise architecture organizations should run now. The organization structure-wise, everything remains the same. It still falls within the highest level of IT organization. It still cuts across all the different business functions. But it no longer is a 100% governance organization. It is not bureaucratic. It's not the Panama Canal where everything passes through it. An enterprise architecture organization is an alliance organization. So think of it like this. There are many different projects which are being run within the organization, whether it's IT projects or whether it's other kind of projects, whether it's mergers and acquisitions or organizational structure changes, or it could be modernization projects within IT. Now, the enterprise architecture organization should align with these projects, right? They should get attached with these projects and they should collect information. Primarily, what is the job of an enterprise architecture organization? One is to collect information about the organization, and second is to ensure that the organization is designed in such a way that it is the most efficient. Now, we have to understand that the enterprise architecture organization has a big picture view of the entire organization. It cuts across all the different business functions. It knows about the different business processes and the different business functions and the redundancies therein and the efficiencies therein and so on and so forth. So when it aligns with a larger program, let's say there is a merger happening. If the enterprise architecture organization aligns with the mergers and acquisitions team, they would be able to guide the team in the best possible way so that they do the merger. And what are the activities that are involved in a merger? Activities are, two organizations are coming together. So what are the business capabilities that are coming together? What are the different business functions that are going to come together? What are the different processes, standards, best practices, people, stakeholders that are going to be coming together? And how are we going to fit them together within one organization? What are the different IT systems that are coming together? What are the different applications, data, technologies, infrastructure, etc., coming together? Now, if an enterprise architecture organization is aligned with the mergers and acquisitions organization, then they would be able to guide this team in the best possible way so that they design the merger in such a way that there's least amount of waste of resources and there is maximum amount of efficiencies. That is one big advantage of aligning, of enterprise architecture organization aligning with major projects. Another big advantage is they would be able to collect this information. So as the organization evolves from one state into the other, from the baseline architecture into the target architecture, from the current state into the future state, the enterprise architecture organization will be able to collect information about these large transformations and document them into an architecture repository so that this information can be used further in future major projects. We are more current with our information about the organization. We are more up to date with what we need to know. And it's a single source of all information about the organization. Of course, there is a CMDB, which also contains a tremendous amount of information, and an enterprise architecture tool should definitely align with the CMDB of your organization so that all this information can be kept together. What goes into the CMDB goes into the CMDB, and then what goes into the enterprise architecture repository goes into the repository. Which raises a very interesting question. What goes into the enterprise architecture repository? So, majority of the building blocks of your organization should go into the CMDB. So your, they call it configuration items. So information about your organizational assets, your servers, your applications, your data should all go into the CMDB. And then the composites that you create out of these building blocks should go into the architecture repository. So let's say that you want information about how many applications do you have that are high availability, and and which business functions do they support. This could be a matrix, it could be a catalog, it could be a diagram, it could be a report. All this information could go into an enterprise architecture repository because enterprise architecture tools are better designed to visualize this information to you. So building blocks go into the CMDB, and then the enterprise architecture tool or repository taps into the CMDB, pulls in all this information and generates visualizations out of it, dashboards out of it, reports out of it, diagrams out of it, and so on and so forth. One final thing that I would like to cover today is also about the maturity of an enterprise architecture organization. What is maturity? Now, theoretically speaking, there is an architecture capability maturity model which is recommended by the TOGAF framework that should be used. Now, an architecture capability maturity model, and I have talked about it in one of my previous episodes of Enterprise Architecture Radio, is based on the capability maturity model, which means there are elements and there are levels. Elements such as, is there a governance process? And when I say, is there a governance process, I don't mean yes or no. It could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 0 is there is no governance process. 1 is there is a governance process, but it is not ubiquitous throughout the organization. Not everything is governed. 2 could be there is a governance process and, for example, being used for a large number of business processes within the organization, but it does not have sophisticated tooling around it, or it is not documented properly, and so on and so forth. Now, what are these maturity? And then 2, 3, 4, and then 5 would be the best case scenario where you have a systematic, sophisticated governance model where there is an architecture board, everything is being reviewed and approved, and exceptions are being documented, and so on and so forth. Now, these levels and these elements, and there could be then another element. I talked about process. Let's say, is there an architecture process? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or is there an enterprise architecture tool where all the information is being stored? A repository, so to speak. And then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. So there are different elements, and then there are maturity levels for each of these elements. And you collect this information. And what these elements are and what these capabilities are can be and should be defined by the enterprise architecture organization in alliance with the architecture board and major senior stakeholders of the organization, and decided. So you decide what your capability maturity model is going to be, architecture capability maturity model is going to be, and then you stick to it. And then in case if you think that there are changes required in the maturity model itself, then you go back to the drawing board and you fix it, and then you come back and everybody approves it. And when I say everybody approves it, it means everybody agrees that this is going to be our maturity model. And today we might be at level 1. Over a period of time, we want to get to level 2 or level 3 or level 4. So that's the maturity model. Now, how do you mature as an organization over a period of time, right? That's another important question that gets raised. So in TOGAF framework, we have what you call the architecture development method, in which we have different phases of the ADM. We have the architecture vision, and there is a preliminary phase where you actually define the capability maturity model on the top, and then you have architecture vision, and then you have business architecture, data architecture, application architecture, technology architecture, and then you have opportunity resolutions, migration plan, implementation governance, and then architecture change management. Now, from the maturity standpoint, architecture change management plays a very important role. There are 2 types of changes which are managed in architecture change management. One is the project, right? One iteration of the ADM is one architecture project. So what are the changes that are required in the project, right? We did a merger, but after implementation governance, we realized that, there are some changes required in the way we have implemented the project. Probably 2 systems need to be, either realigned, or 2 business functions need to be restructured, or what have you, depending upon what the changes are, and the stakeholders decide that. So this is a change in what was implemented in this iteration of the ADM, right? But there's one more thing that we look at when we do architecture change management, and that is, what are the changes required in the architecture capability itself, right? Is our architecture process good enough? Is our governance model efficient enough? Is our enterprise architecture tool and repository sufficiently advanced or sophisticated? So in this architecture change management, we evaluate our architecture process. If you've done agile, after every sprint or after every few sprints, we used to do what you call agile retrospectives, right? There is a sprint review, And then there is an agile retrospective. The sprint review talks about what was implemented and whether what was implemented was correct or not, and if there are any changes required in it, right? That is the sprint review. But agile retrospectives is about the agile process itself. That did we follow agile processes appropriately or not? Did we do the scrum meetings that we do on a daily basis properly or not? Was the attendance good enough or not? Is the velocity improving or not? If not, then why? Right? So we look at the agile. Similarly, in enterprise architecture, we have architecture change management, in which we also look at how mature is our organization. And then we go back to the capability maturity model and we look at all the different elements and where are we today and whether we are maturing after every iteration or not. Now, I'm not saying that you have to mature as an enterprise architecture organization in every single iteration, but at least every few iterations, it is very important to go back to the capability maturity model and re-evaluate the maturity of the architecture organization. Re-evaluate the return of investments that the architecture organization is giving to the overall enterprise. So that is how you mature as an enterprise architecture capability. I can see that today's episode was a little bit longer than my usual 10 to 12 minute bites. Let me know if you've enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think. Once again, I would like to remind you that Enterprise Architecture Radio is not just a podcast. It is a community of practicing enterprise architects, IT professionals, and business professionals for that matter, coming together and talking to each other and learning from each other, guiding each other, but most importantly, having a ton of fun.